I never believed I would end up telling this story. And even now, I sometimes wish I could forget it instead of repeating it. But it won't leave me. It clings to me like the damp smell of those woods. Maybe if I tell it, I'll sleep a little easier. Or maybe not. It started as a family trip. My wife and I wanted to escape the city for a weekend, to give our daughter a taste of the outdoors and ourselves a break from constant noise. The cabin we rented was tucked deep into a forest that stretched for miles in every direction. No neighbors, no traffic, just trees and silence. At least, that's what the website promised. The drive there was long. The deeper we went, the narrower the roads became. Asphalt turned to gravel, and gravel gave way to dirt. Trees leaned over the road like tall, dark guards closing us in. My daughter, sitting in the back seat, kept pointing at the shapes between the branches. Daddy, look, a deer. Sometimes she was right. Other times, there was nothing. My wife laughed, trying to keep the mood light, but I felt uneasy. The air grew heavier the closer we got, the kind of heavy that makes your skin prickle. When we finally arrived, the cabin looked perfect, almost too perfect. A small wooden structure with a porch, a rocking chair that groaned in the breeze, and a stone fireplace inside. The smell of pine filled the rooms, and the windows looked out onto a clearing surrounded by endless forest. For a while, everything felt fine. We unpacked, cooked dinner, roasted marshmallows in the fireplace, and told stories. My daughter was thrilled, but that night changed everything. After putting my daughter to bed, I went outside to grab some firewood. The forest was drowned in moonlight, pale silver pouring between the branches. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a tree, but then I noticed the shape was too defined. A tall figure, standing at the edge of the clearing, motionless. He wore a dark hood that cast his face in shadow. I froze, firewood slipping from my hands. I stared, waiting for him to move, to walk away, to do anything. But he didn't. He just stood there, facing the cabin, watching. Fear crawled up my spine. I hurried back inside, locked the door, and tried to calm down. My wife saw my face and asked what was wrong. I lied, saying I thought I saw a deer. But my hands shook as I closed the curtains. Hours later, while my wife and daughter slept, I sat in the living room, unable to rest. The cabin creaked and groaned like it was breathing. Every little sound made me flinch. Finally, I gave in and peeked through the curtains. He was still there, but closer, now at the edge of the yard, standing perfectly still under the moonlight. His hood tilted slightly, like he knew I was watching. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to grab my phone and call the police, but there was no signal, no bars, no internet. We were completely cut off. I whispered to myself, he'll leave, he's just some creep. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate tapping against the living room window. My blood froze. I turned my head, praying it was a branch. But when I looked, he was there, his face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. His skin was pale, almost gray under the moonlight. His mouth twisted into a smile that made me sick. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. My wife woke up, startled by the noise. She screamed when she saw him too. I grabbed the fireplace poker, yelling at him to leave. He didn't move. He just watched us. Then, suddenly, he was gone. We waited, holding our breath, listening for footsteps or movement outside. Nothing, just silence. It was like he had disappeared into thin air. We pushed furniture against the doors and windows, kept the lights on, and huddled together. My daughter asked what was happening, but I couldn't answer. I couldn't lie anymore, but I couldn't tell her the truth either. The hours dragged. At one point, I swore I heard footsteps on the porch, slow and heavy, moving back and forth. The rocking chair creaked as if someone had sat down. My wife clutched my arm so tightly I thought she'd draw blood. I wanted to check, but I couldn't bring myself to open the door. Then came the laughter, low, broken, echoing from outside. Not loud enough to be clear, but enough to know it was meant for us. My daughter buried her face in her mother's chest, sobbing. I wanted to protect them, but I felt powerless. When dawn finally broke, silence returned. I opened the door, my hand shaking. The yard looked untouched, like no one had been there at all. But on the porch, the rocking chair was swaying gently, as if it had only just been vacated. And on the window where his face had pressed, there was a smudge, shaped like a handprint, too large to be mine, too distinct to be an illusion. We left the cabin that morning, vowing never to return. We didn't stop until we were hours away, but the fear didn't leave. Because sometimes when the night is quiet and the moonlight spills through my own window at home, I swear I see a shadow just beyond the trees, watching, waiting, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he'd managed to get inside. I remember the night clearly, even though I've tried for years to blur the edges of my mind, to convince myself it wasn't as terrifying as it felt. But no matter how much time passes, every detail remains sharp. It was supposed to be just a family dinner. Nothing more, nothing less. I had been away from home for months, caught up with work and the constant demands of the city. My mother insisted I come back for dinner, saying it had been far too long since the family sat around the same table. My father echoed her sentiment in his usual stern way, which I'd learned not to argue with. So I made the trip back to the small town where I grew up, convincing myself it would be good, familiar, comforting. When I walked to the front door, the house smelled exactly the same as it had when I was a child, like roasted meat, fresh bread, and faintly of pine wood from the old furniture. The kitchen lights were warm, almost too bright, and for a moment, I thought maybe this really was going to be a nice evening. My mother greeted me first, wrapping me in a hug that felt a little too tight. She whispered how happy she was to see me. My father followed, his handshake firm, his eyes as cold and unreadable as always. My younger sister, Emily, came bouncing out of the dining room, her smile wide but her eyes tired, like she hadn't slept in days. We sat down at the dining table, the four of us. The meal was already laid out: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a basket of warm rolls. My mother had gone all out, just like she used to when I was a kid. The sight of it almost made me forget my nerves. Almost. At first, the conversation was normal. They asked about my job, about the city, about whether I was eating properly. I answered as best as I could, trying to sound casual, but I couldn't shake a feeling that something was wrong. My mother kept glancing at the empty chair at the end of the table. My father's hand trembled slightly whenever he lifted his glass. Emily barely touched her food, staring down at her plate like she was afraid to look up. Halfway through the meal, it began. I was cutting into my chicken when I heard it. A faint sound, like silverware clinking against the plate, but it hadn't come from any of us. We were all still. The sound had come from the empty chair. I froze, fork halfway in my mouth, and looked at the others. My mother smiled nervously, pretending she hadn't heard. My father cleared his throat and muttered something about the old house settling. Emily's eyes flicked to the empty chair and then quickly away, like she was terrified of what she might see if she stared too long. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in my throat, because a few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a knife scraping against the plate. "Did you guys hear that?" I finally asked. No one answered. My mother just told me to eat before the food got cold. My father grunted, stabbing at his potatoes. Emily's hand shook so badly she spilled water down her blouse. And then the chair moved, just a little, an inch, maybe two, but enough for all of us to see it. The room went silent. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. My mother whispered something under her breath, words I couldn't catch. My father's face went pale, but he said nothing. Emily began to cry quietly, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to get up to demand answers, but I couldn't move. It felt like something heavy had settled over me, pinning me to my chair. Then, slowly, as if dragged by invisible hands, the empty plate at the end of the table slid forward. The knife and fork lifted off the table and pressed down into the food. The chicken tore apart in jagged pieces, the knife moving up and down with steady, unnatural rhythm. I gasped, pushing back from the table. What the hell is going on? I shouted. My father's voice was flat, almost mechanical when he finally spoke. Don't make it angry. Make it angry? The words rattled in my brain, but before I could demand more, the lights flickered. Shadows stretched across the room, twisting unnaturally. The air grew colder, so cold I could see my breath. The chair at the end of the table scraped backwards suddenly, as if someone had stood up. I swear I saw it then, just for a second, a figure, tall and thin, draped in darkness, standing right there at the head of the table. Its face was blurred, shifting like smoke, but I could feel its eyes locked on me. My mother reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip desperate. Don't look at it, she whispered. Just eat. Pretend it isn't here. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there, but their faces told me this wasn't new. They had been living with this thing for a long time, dinner after dinner, night after night, pretending everything was normal while it sat among them. I forced myself to look down at my plate, but I couldn't stop shaking. The sound of chewing filled the room, wet, slow, animal-like chewing, but none of us were eating. My sister suddenly let out a sob and stood up. I can't do this anymore, she cried, backing away from the table. The chewing stopped. The air grew even colder. Before I could react, the lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed us whole. I heard a scream, Emily's scream, cut short, like someone had smothered it in an instant. My mother shrieked her name, fumbling in the dark. I scrambled for my phone, using the weak glow of the screen to see. When the light came on, Emily was gone. Her chair was empty, tipped onto its side. The only trace left behind was her half-eaten roll, lying on the floor. My father slammed his fist onto the table. I told you not to make it angry, he roared. His voice cracked, his face twisted with both fear and rage. I stumbled back, heart racing, eyes darting around the room. Where is she? What happened? No one answered. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse and breathe, moving closer. The chewing started again, louder now, echoing through the dark. It wasn't just one set of jaws. It was many. I dropped my phone. The screen shattered, plunging us back into darkness. My mother was crying. My father was muttering something over and over, some prayer or chant. I couldn't move. My body felt paralyzed. The last thing I remember before blacking out was a feeling of cold breath on the back of my neck and a whisper, low and guttural, saying, "You took my seat." When I woke up, it was morning. The sun streamed through the windows like nothing had happened. The table was clean, the dishes put away. My mother and father sat across from me, pale and silent. Emily was gone. No one spoke about her, not once. When I asked, my mother just smiled weakly and said, "Eat your breakfast." And that's when I realized there was still an empty chair at the end of the table, waiting, always waiting. I still remember the night we all gathered for a family dinner at my grandmother's house. It had been years since the entire family managed to sit around the same table. People had moved away, grown distant, busy with work or school, and some relationships had quietly fractured. But that night, my grandmother insisted. She wanted everyone under one roof again, sharing food, laughter, and memories the way we used when I was a child. Her house sat on the edge of town, the kind of old place that creaked no matter how gently you stepped. The air always carried the faint smell of cedar and dust, mixed with whatever was cooking in her kitchen. I loved it, even though it unsettled me sometimes. The way the shadows stretched long across the hallway, or how the attic door always seemed a little too ajar. Still, it was home in a way few places ever are. When I walked in that evening, the first thing I noticed was how warm it felt compared to the crisp autumn air outside. The dining table was already set, polished silverware and mismatched plates laid out for what looked like 12 people. That made sense. There were supposed to be 12 of us. But when I counted the chairs, I paused. 13. One extra chair squeezed at the end, like someone had dragged it in at the last minute. Grandma must have miscounted. I thought, brushing it off. Everyone began to arrive not long after. My parents, my aunt and uncle, my cousins, even my older brother, who I hadn't seen in months. The house filled with voices, laughter echoing to the hallway, the smell of roasted chicken and baked bread wafting from the kitchen. For a moment, it felt right, comfortable, the way family dinners were supposed to feel. We sat down eventually, plates piled high, chatter bouncing from one end of the table to the other. I sat near the middle, close to my grandmother. The food tasted as good as I remembered, rich, hearty, made with the kind of love you could never buy. But even as I laughed along with the others, I couldn't stop noticing that extra chair. It wasn't empty anymore. Someone was sitting there. At first, I thought maybe I just overlooked one of my cousins or an in-law I didn't recognize. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. The figure was blurry somehow, not in the way my eyes fail me, but in the way you try to recall a dream after waking. Features slipped away the second I tried to hold on to them. A man, I thought, or maybe a woman. The shape was human, sitting still, hands folded neatly on the table, but I couldn't tell you a single detail about their face. I leaned toward my grandmother, whispering, "Who's that at the end of the table?" Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. For the briefest second, her eyes widened before she looked down at her plate again. "Eat," she whispered back firmly. "Don't be rude." Her response chilled me. She'd heard me, but she didn't answer. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself maybe I was overtired, maybe I just hadn't recognized a distant relative. But the longer I sat there, the stranger it felt. Whenever I glanced down the table, the guests never moved. Not to eat, not to speak, not even to shift in their chair. Just sitting, watching. And yet nobody else at the table seemed disturbed. They carried on as though the guest had always been there. Halfway through the meal, my aunt raised a toast, her voice trembling with emotion. She talked about how good it felt to be together again, how important family was. Everyone lifted their glasses, even the guest. I saw their hand move, pale and long-fingered, curling around the stem of the glass. But the moment I blinked, the image dissolved. Their hand was gone. The glass remained untouched. I didn't drink after that. As the night wore on, the room seemed to change. The laughter grew thinner, the shadows stretched longer, and the warmth of the house turned heavy, suffocating. I kept waiting for someone else to acknowledge it, to mention the 13th guest, but no one did. Not my parents, not my brother, not even the younger cousins who were usually too curious to stay quiet. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked louder this time, "Who is that sitting at the end of the table?" The room went silent. Every clink of silverware stopped. Every voice fell away. And slowly, every head turned toward me, except for the guest. They didn't move. My grandmother's face tightened. "That's enough," she said sharply. I laughed nervously, tried to play it off, but the air in the room had shifted. Nobody was smiling anymore. My brother leaned close to me and whispered, "Don't draw attention." That warning sat heavy in my chest. Don't draw attention. Attention from who? I stopped eating after that. My appetite was gone. I sat stiffly, watching, waiting for something to happen. And it did. The lights flickered once, twice, before steadying again. In that brief dimness, the guests had moved closer, only one chair away from where they'd been before. Nobody reacted. Plates passed, stories told, but my skin crawled. I couldn't understand how no one else noticed. By dessert, the guest was seated directly across from me, their presence pressed against me like a weight. My vision blurred whenever I tried to focus on them, but I could feel their eyes, cold, fixed, studying me. I dropped my spoon, the clatter loud in the tense room. My cousin asked if I was okay, her tone strange, almost rehearsed. I nodded quickly, though every nerve in my body screamed otherwise. Then, as we all sat there, a strange rhythm began. Tap, 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 the sound of fingers drumming against wood. Not fast, not loud, but steady. Coming from directly in front of me, the guest's blurred hand moved against the table, tapping in a deliberate pattern. I covered my ears, but the sound still reached me somehow, inside my skull, like it wasn't external at all. My grandmother stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "Dinner's over," she declared. Her voice shook. "Everyone go home." Chairs pushed back, coats gathered, polite goodbyes exchanged. Everyone moved like nothing had been wrong, like it had been a perfectly ordinary evening. But my heart hammered against my ribs as I hurried to the door, desperate to leave that house behind. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I glanced back one last time. The dining room was empty now, empty except for one figure still seated at the table, staring out through the window at me, the 13th guest. And though I left that house and never returned for another family dinner, I know one thing for certain. Somewhere, that extra chair is still waiting, and one day it might be mine. I never thought a family dinner could turn into the most disturbing night of my life. For years, my family hadn't gathered together at my grandmother's house. Everyone had their reasons, arguments, distance, grudges, but somehow she convinced us all to show up on the same night. I remember feeling both excited and nervous as I pulled into her long driveway, the old house looming in the distance with its flickering porch light. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of roasted meat and spices filled the air. It should have been comforting, but for some reason, it made my stomach twist. My grandmother greeted me warmly, hugging me tighter than usual, her eyes glistening with something I couldn't quite place. The dining room was already set, and that's when I noticed it. The table was arranged for 7 people. But counting the guests, my grandmother, my parents, my uncle, my cousin, and me, we only made 6. There was a 7th chair at the far end of the table. It wasn't just any chair, either. It was older, taller, carved with strange patterns I didn't recognize. A thick red cushion rested on it, and in front of it, a plate and silverware had been neatly arranged. I tried to joke about it. Expecting someone else? I asked, pulling my chair out. My grandmother didn't laugh. She just smiled faintly and said, "That seat is always there. Don't worry about it." I should have pressed her, but the rest of my family began arriving and the night moved on. Everyone sat down, drinks were poured, and dishes began passing around. Laughter filled the air at first, as if the years of distance and silence had been erased. For a moment, it almost felt normal, but I couldn't stop glancing at that empty chair. Every time someone passed a plate of food, it seemed to stop there. My father would place the dish in front of the empty seat for just a second before moving it on, as though offering it first. When my cousin accidentally spilled a bit of wine, she muttered sorry under her breath, but not to us. Her eyes darted toward the chair. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was just overanalyzing. But then as we ate, I started noticing small details that didn't make sense. The meat platter was nearly empty, though I could swear no one had taken that much. The bread basket, too, seemed to lighten faster than hands could reach for it. At one point, I leaned forward and whispered to my cousin, "Are you seeing this? The food is disappearing." She shushed me quickly, her eyes wide, and shook her head. Her fork trembled slightly in her hand. That's when I felt it, a shift in the air, like someone exhaling right behind me. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. Slowly, I turned my head toward the empty chair. The cushion looked slightly indented, as if someone were sitting there. I swallowed hard and looked away. Conversation carried on as if nothing strange was happening. My uncle told stories about his work. My parents reminisced about their younger days. My grandmother laughed softly, but I wasn't listening anymore. My attention kept pulling back to that seat, and every time I glanced, I was more certain something was there. Halfway through the meal, my grandmother raised her glass. "To family," she said. Everyone else echoed her words, lifting their drinks. But then, almost in unison, they turned their heads slightly toward the empty chair before sipping. I didn't. Instead, I stared, my glass hovering in my hand. And that's when I saw the knife. It wasn't in the same position as before. The silver knife beside the empty plate had shifted, angled slightly toward me. I hadn't touched it. Nobody had. My chest tightened, and for the rest of the toast, I couldn't breathe properly. The room grew colder as dessert arrived. My grandmother brought out a pie, placing it in the center of the table. Everyone served themselves, except me. I wasn't hungry anymore. But as I glanced at the pie, I saw a clean slice vanish from it, as if cut by invisible hands. The fork beside the empty plate scraped faintly against porcelain. This time, I wasn't the only one who heard it. My mother's eyes flickered toward the sound, then quickly back to her plate. No one said a word. No one dared acknowledge it. My pulse raced. Who's supposed to be sitting there? I finally asked, my voice breaking the thick silence. The table went quiet. My family froze. My grandmother's expression hardened, her eyes locking on me with a look that felt almost warning. Then she smiled again, soft, forced. "It's tradition," she said calmly. "Every family has their ways." I wanted to push further, but something deep in me told me not to. It felt dangerous. The rest of the dinner dragged on, each minute heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of someone sitting right beside me though no one was visible. Shadows seemed to stretch longer across the walls, the candlelight flickering unnaturally. When the plates were cleared, my grandmother stood. "Thank you all for joining," she said warmly. "He's very pleased." My blood turned cold. She didn't say we're pleased. She said he's pleased. Everyone nodded, murmuring their agreement. Everyone but me. The moment I stood up, the chair creaked loudly, as though someone else had risen too. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just hurried out, my footsteps echoing too loud in the hallway. As I reached the door, I heard it clearly, a whisper, low and rasping, carried through the dining room. "Next time, it's your seat." I slammed the door behind me and didn't stop running until I reached my car. Even now, I can't erase the image of that empty chair from my mind or the sound of something unseen eating right beside us. And the worst part? My grandmother called me yesterday. She said she's planning another family dinner, and this time, she insisted I sit at the head of the table. I'll never forget the first family dinner we had in our new house. We had just moved into a quiet little town, the kind of place where everyone smiles a little too wide and waves from their porches as you drive past. The house itself was old but charming, with creaky floors and tall windows that let in the evening sun. My wife thought it was perfect for raising the kids. I thought it was just a house. But that night changed everything. We decided to celebrate our move with a proper family dinner. Just the four of us. Me, my wife, and our two kids. My wife made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the works. The smell filled the whole house, warm and familiar. And for a while, it felt like nothing could go wrong. We sat down together, clinking glasses, passing plates, laughing at stupid jokes. But then, the first strange thing happened. As I passed the mashed potatoes to my son, the serving spoon slipped out of the bowl and clattered onto the table. Except, it didn't look like it slipped. It looked like it had been yanked, as though an invisible hand had tugged it away. My son froze, staring at the spoon. My wife gave a nervous laugh. "Old house," she said. "Drafts everywhere." We tried to shake it off. But then the chicken platter shifted, scraping across the table about an inch, stopping right in front of the empty chair at the far end. And that's when I realized something I hadn't before. There were 5 plates set at the table. I stared at the extra setting: plate, fork, knife, glass of water, all perfectly arranged, though none of us had put it there. I asked my wife about it, trying to keep my voice calm. She frowned. "I only set 4 places. You saw me." But the plate was there, clear as day. We tried to ignore it, kept eating, though the mood was different now. My daughter was unusually quiet, pushing her food around with her fork. Then she whispered something so soft, I almost didn't hear it. "Daddy, she's hungry." The room fell silent. My wife's face drained the color. I asked my daughter what she meant, but she just shook her head and wouldn't say another word. That's when the sounds began, soft at first. A faint giggle, like a child laughing from under the table. Then the creak of the old wood floorboards, moving in a circle around us. My wife gripped my hand on the table, her nails digging into my skin. The roast chicken shifted again, and this time a clean slice fell onto the empty plate. The knife moved smoothly, though no one touched it. We all sat frozen as the fork beside the plate lifted, scraping softly against porcelain, and the food slowly disappeared as if chewed by invisible teeth. I wanted to get up to grab my kids and run, but my body wouldn't move. It felt like the air itself pressed me into my chair. My son whimpered, clutching his napkin in his fists. The laughter grew louder, joined by whispers, voices overlapping, too many to count. I couldn't understand the words, but they were urgent, demanding, circling the table like a chant. The glasses rattled, the lights flickered. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The room went still. The food was untouched again, except for the empty plate, which was now smeared with grease and crumbs. My daughter slowly lifted her eyes to meet mine, and in a trembling voice she said, "They're not done." I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to know, but I did anyway. "Who's not done?" Her lips quivered as she whispered, "The family that lived here before us." The temperature in the room dropped instantly. My wife gasped, covering her mouth. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I'd heard rumors when we bought the house, vague whispers from neighbors who warned us it had a history. But I brushed them off, told myself people in small towns love ghost stories. Now I knew the truth. The meal continued, though none of us touched our plates. More food vanished into nothing. More laughter echoed from nowhere. At one point, my son's glass filled back up after he'd emptied it, water rising to brim as if poured by an unseen hand. He burst into tears, and I pulled him close, glaring at the empty seat. When the last bite of food disappeared, the voices stopped. Silence fell over the room again. Then every plate, including ours, slid forward in unison, aligning perfectly at the edge of the table. The lights went out. I don't know how long we sat there in the dark. Maybe seconds, maybe hours. But when the lights finally flickered back on, the table was empty. Every dish, every scrap of food, even the silverware, gone. Only the 5 plates remained, neatly stacked in the center. We didn't speak a word as we left the dining room. My wife grabbed the kids, and we all huddled in the living room for the rest of the night, too terrified to move. The next morning, the table was set again. 5 plates, 5 glasses, 5 silver knives lined up like they've been waiting for us. We haven't sat down for another family dinner since. But sometimes late at night, I hear the sound of forks scraping against plates, faint laughter drifting down the hallway, and the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. And every time I know they're reminding us, in this house, dinner is never just for us. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in over a decade. Too many arguments, too many broken promises, and a lifetime of bitterness had kept me away. But when my mother called me, her voice shaky and frail, begging me to come for Sunday dinner, something inside me gave in. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just the way she said, "We've all been waiting for you." When I pulled up to the old house, nothing had changed. The same peeling paint, the same sagging porch, the same crooked shutters that always rattled in the wind. But the moment I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. The dining room table was set lavishly. A full spread of roasted turkey, glazed ham, casseroles, pies, breads. Enough food for a dozen people. But as far as I knew, only my parents, my sister, and I would be eating. Wow! I muttered, trying to laugh. Expecting company? My mother just smiled warmly. Of course, we always are. The words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I brushed it off and sat down, trying to ignore the pit in my stomach. The family greeted me like nothing had ever gone wrong. My father clapped me on the back. My sister hugged me tight. And for a while, the conversation flowed as if no years had passed at all. But as the plates began to fill, I noticed something odd. Every time someone spoke, they would glance toward the far side of the table. An empty chair sat there, with a plate already prepared, stuffing ham, turkey piled high. My father would nod at the space as if listening. My sister laughed at one point, her eyes fixed on nothing, then muttered, "Oh, you're terrible," as if someone had whispered a joke. I tried to play along. Maybe it was some new family quirk. Maybe they were messing with me. But soon the unease turned to dread. Halfway through dinner, I felt it, a presence beside me. The air pressed against my shoulder like someone leaning close. My fork slipped from my hand. The empty chair scraped slightly against the floor, just a few inches closer to the table. I froze. Did you hear that? No one answered. They just smiled, continuing to eat. My mother's eyes flicked to me, soft and almost pitying. "It's okay. You'll get used to it." I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. Used to what? Before anyone could answer, the plate at the empty chair shifted. The mashed potatoes sank, a clean scoop missing. The knife cut smoothly through the turkey breast, though no one held it. A piece lifted into the air, then vanished as though consumed by invisible teeth. My stomach churned. My father raised his glass, and my family followed. "To finally being together again," he said. They clinked their glasses, every one of them, and then, in unison, they all turned their gaze to the empty chair. I didn't drink. I couldn't move. My hands were trembling so badly I thought the glass would shatter. That's when the memories came flooding back. Not memories of arguments or childhood fights. Something older, something deeper. Flashes of myself at this table years ago. Laughing, eating, talking, but then an image I couldn't place. Me at the head of the table. My face pale, eyes closed, my mother sobbing, my father holding my lifeless hand. I gasped, pushing my chair back. What is this? What the hell is going on? The room fell silent. My family's smiles didn't fade, but their eyes darkened. My sister reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. Her skin felt cold. You left us once, she whispered, but you came back. We never let go of you. The whispers began then, soft at first, circling the room. Familiar voices layered over each other, my own voice among them, my own laugh, my own cry. The walls seemed to breathe, the lights flickering with each pulse of sound. No, I muttered, shaking my head. No, I'm alive. I left. I moved away. My mother's eyes glistened with tears. Sweetheart, you didn't leave. Not really. You never made it past that night. You've always been here with us. The room tilted, my vision blurring. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out beneath me. My breath came in shallow gasps. I looked at the empty chair again, and for the first time, I saw him, my face, pale and hollow, staring back. The other me smiled, lifting his glass. Finally, he whispered, we're all together again. Darkness swallowed me whole. When I opened my eyes, the food was gone. The plates were clean. The table was empty, except for the 5 chairs, each one occupied. My family sat smiling, and at the far end, the other me raised his glass. I realized then I wasn't a guest. I was part of the ritual. And in this house, family dinner never ends. I never thought a simple family dinner could leave me questioning the nature of reality itself. It all started on a cool autumn evening, the kind where the air feels crisp and the dying sunlight filters through the trees like fractured gold. My mother had called earlier in the week, insisting that we all come together. It's been too long, she said, her voice heavy with an urgency I didn't quite understand. The drive back to my childhood home was strangely unsettling. The roads felt unfamiliar, though I had traveled them countless times. Old houses leaned toward the street like weary sentinels, their paint peeling and windows cracked. By the time I pulled into the driveway, dusk had already wrapped the neighborhood in shadows. The house looked the same, yet somehow off. The shutters were slightly askew, and the porch light flickered as though straining to stay alive. Inside, the warmth of the house greeted me, carried with it the comforting smell of roasted meat herbs and something sweet baking in the oven. My mother hugged me tightly, almost desperately, her arms trembling. She looked thinner, her face pale, her smile just a little too wide. My father appeared in the hallway behind her, but he didn't speak. He simply nodded, as if words had lost all meaning. The dining room table was set for 7. That caught my attention immediately, because as far as I knew, only 5 of us were supposed to be there. Myself, my parents, and my 2 younger siblings, Daniel and Grace. I asked about the extra places, but my mother just shook her head. We'll all be here soon, she said, as though that explained everything. Daniel and Grace arrived shortly after. They looked uneasy too, exchanging glances but saying little. We sat at the table, the candles flickering, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls. My mother served the food with exaggerated care, placing each dish on the table as though performing some kind of ritual. As we began to eat, the conversation was strained. My father asked about work, my mother about my health, but their voices were flat, mechanical. I noticed that Daniel and Grace barely touched their plates, their eyes darting toward the empty chairs. Then, without warning, my mother lifted her glass and said, "To the family." We echoed her words hesitantly, and that's when the front door creaked open. I froze. Everyone else seemed perfectly calm, as if expecting this. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed to the hallway, and then they appeared. 3 figures, pale and gaunt, their eyes sunken, their clothes old-fashioned and tattered. They sat down in the empty chairs without a word. No one reacted, not my parents, not my siblings. They simply continued eating, passing dishes as though nothing was out of the ordinary. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move. One of the figures, a man with hollow eyes and a smile that didn't reach his lips, turned to me. "It's been a long time," he whispered. His voice was dry, brittle, like leaves crushed underfoot. I didn't know him, yet his words felt familiar, as though they belonged to some buried memory. The dinner continued in eerie silence, punctuated only by the clink of silverware. The 3 strangers ate nothing, their hands hovering just above the food. My siblings sat stiffly, their faces pale. I noticed Grace's hand trembling beneath the table, clutching Daniel's tightly. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Who are they?" I demanded, my voice shaking. My mother's smile faltered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They are part of us," she whispered. "They always have been." The room seemed to darken, the candles sputtering. The walls felt closer, pressing in. My father leaned forward, his eyes locking on mine. "We can't ignore them anymore. Tonight, we welcome them back." Suddenly, the 3 figures began to change. Their skin grew darker, stretching tight across their bones. Their mouths opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The air filled with the stench of decay, and the temperature dropped so low I could see my breath. Panic surged through me. I pushed back on the table, but my chair wouldn't move. It felt glued to the floor. My hands shook as I gripped the armrests, desperate to free myself. My mother reached across the table, her hand icy cold as it closed over mine. "Don't fight it," she said softly. "This is our family." I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness spreading through the room. The figures leaned closer, their whispers filling my ears, words I couldn't understand, yet somehow knew were ancient and binding. The last thing I remember clearly is their faces, inches from mine, their breath rancid, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Then everything went black. When I awoke, I was still at the table. The plates were clean, the candles burned down to stubs. My parents and siblings were gone. The 3 extra chairs were empty again. I stumbled to my feet, my body trembling, and rushed out of the house. I haven't been back since. But sometimes, late at night, I hear them, footsteps in my hallway, whispers in the dark. And I know one day they'll come for me too, because family dinners are forever. I hadn't been home for a family dinner in years. Work, distance, and excuses I stacked like bricks kept me away from that table. But when my mom called and said, "We're all waiting for you this Sunday. Don't be late this time," something in her voice made me say yes without hesitation. I didn't know then that this would be the last normal dinner I'd ever experience. When I walked into the old house, the warmth hit me instantly. The familiar smell of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie clung to the air. The dining room looked just as I remembered. Mahogany table polished to a shine, candles flickering in their holders, plates neatly arranged. My mom rushed over, hugging me so tight it almost hurt, while my dad gave me one of his proud, quiet smiles. My younger sister Emily bouncing from the kitchen, waving a spoon like a wand, teasing me for finally showing up. It felt good, too good, almost as if no time had passed. We sat down and everything seemed normal at first. The food was incredible, laughter flowed, and conversations overlapped. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years. Every time I looked at their faces, I thought, I've missed this. I should have come home sooner. But small things started to bother me. For one, the amount of food on the table was overwhelming. There were at least twice as many dishes as we could ever finish. Platters of meat, steaming bowls of potatoes, vegetables, soups, pies, like a feast prepared for a holiday or a crowd. Mom, I joked, "Are you expecting the neighbors too?" She didn't laugh. She just gave me a strange smile and said, "We've been saving all this for tonight. We didn't want to disappoint." I brushed it off, but the unease sat in my chest. As the dinner went on, I noticed my family occasionally glancing at the empty chair at the far end of the table. It was set just like the others. Plate, silverware, glass of water, but no one sat there. Every time I asked about it, they changed the subject. My dad poured wine. Emily asked about my job. Mom urged me to eat more. Still, their eyes betrayed them. They flicked to that chair again and again, like they were expecting someone to arrive. Halfway through the meal, I heard it. The sound of a chair sliding against the floorboards. I froze. Everyone else kept eating as though nothing had happened. I glanced at the empty chair. It wasn't empty anymore. I couldn't see anyone sitting there, but the food on the plate was moving. A piece of chicken shifted. Mashed potatoes dipped as though a spoon had cut through them, and a glass of water rippled like someone had just touched it. My fork clattered to the table. What the hell? Did you guys see that? Emily's eyes flicked to me. Her smile tightened. You're imagining things. Just eat. But I wasn't imagining. I could hear it. The sound of chewing, the scrape of silverware against porcelain coming from the empty chair. My family ignored it completely, carrying on with their conversations as though it were the most natural thing in the world. I tried to laugh it off, though my hands shook. So, we have an invisible guest tonight? Mom's voice was soft but firm. Don't be rude. They've been waiting a long time for you to join us. The air seemed to drop 10 degrees. My appetite vanished, but Mom kept piling food onto my plate, urging me to eat more. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes, God, her eyes looked desperate, pleading almost. Then I started to notice the differences in them. Emily's hands. They were trembling, not from nervousness, but from effort, like she was holding something back. My dad's voice was steady, but every word he spoke was just a little too rehearsed, too even, like he was reciting lines he practiced. Mom's face glowed with forced warmth, yet her gaze darted constantly to that chair, as if waiting for permission. The noises at the empty place grew louder. Breathing, wet chewing, and then a laugh, low, guttural, completely inhuman. I dropped my fork. Who's here? What's going on? My dad's jaw tightened. Don't, he said sharply. Just eat. The room seemed to close in around me. The shadows thrown by the candlelight stretched and bent unnaturally, crawling across the walls like living things. I felt something brush against my leg on the table, icy, claw-like fingers grazing my skin. I jerked back, kicking the table. Plates rattled. Emily gasped. Mom whispered frantically, "Please, don't upset them." I couldn't breathe. My family wasn't scared of me. They were scared of whatever else was at that table. And then I heard it speak. My name, in a voice that sounded like it was being dragged through broken glass. The glass at the empty seat shattered, water spilling across the table. The food on that plate vanished bite by bite, faster now, as though unseen jaws devoured it hungrily. My mom was crying silently, tears slipping down her cheeks, but she still kept smiling at me, urging me with her eyes to stay calm. I pushed back my chair. I'm leaving, but my family rose in unison. Emily grabbed my wrist with a strength that didn't belong to her. My dad stepped behind me, blocking my way. Mom's voice broke as she said, "You can't go." You've been chosen. We needed you here tonight." The invisible thing at the head of the table laughed again, louder this time, shaking the walls. The candles blew out, plunging us into darkness. Something cold pressed against the back of my neck, and I realized it wasn't invisible anymore. I couldn't see it with my eyes, but every nerve in my body screamed that it was there. Huge, watching, waiting. My family didn't move. They just stood there, surrounding me, like they weren't my family anymore, but servants of whatever had claimed that chair. And then I understood the feast wasn't for us. It was for it, and I was the real main course. The last thing I remember was my mom whispering, "We're so sorry. We love you. Forgive us." After that, the world dissolved into screams, darkness, and the endless sound of chewing that still haunts me every night. When my mom called me and asked me to come home for dinner, I almost said no. It had only been 3 weeks since the funeral. 3 weeks since we buried my grandfather in the cemetery just outside town. I wasn't ready to sit at that table again, to see his empty chair staring back at me like a ghost. But her voice was insistent, almost trembling. "It's important, Daniel. You have to be here tonight. Everyone will be there. We can't do this without you." So, against my better judgment, I drove back to the old house. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of roasted meat and herbs filled the air, a smell so familiar it made my stomach tighten with both hunger and dread. The house looked the same as always, but it felt off, too quiet, too heavy, like the walls themselves were listening. The dining room was set with care. The polished oak table was covered in dishes, steaming bowls of potatoes, roasted chicken, fresh bread, green beans, pies. The kind of spread my mom would only make on holidays. And then I saw it, the chair at the end of the table, my grandfather's chair. It was set as though he were still alive. Plate, silverware, glass, even his old cloth napkin folded neatly. For a moment, I thought maybe this was just my mom's way of honoring him. But the longer I looked, the more it felt wrong. Like they weren't honoring him. They were expecting him. My family welcomed me warmly. My mom hugged me. My dad clapped my back. My sister Anna squeezed my hand. Everyone smiled too much, spoke too quickly, like they were desperate for me to settle in and not ask questions. We sat down, and at first, everything seemed almost normal. We talked about work, about Anna's kids, about the weather. My dad poured wine. My mom passed the bread. I forced myself to relax, though my eyes kept drifting to that chair. Halfway through the meal, something strange happened. I looked down at my plate. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, normal. I glanced up when Anna told a joke, and when I looked back, the chicken was raw, red, wet, bleeding onto the potatoes. I blinked hard, and it was fine again, cooked in golden brown. I nearly dropped my fork. Did anyone else eat? My mom interrupted, smiling tightly. "You need your strength." I stared at her. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It happened again minutes later. The bread basket was full of warm rolls 1 second, moldy and blackened the next. The green beans shimmer with a slick, oily coating that looked like rot before snapping back to normal. Every time I looked too long, the food changed, flesh, decay, blood, and my family pretended not to notice. Then I heard it, a voice, low, gravelly, familiar. "Why aren't you eating, Danny?" I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. That was my grandfather's voice. It was coming from the living room. I turned my head slowly. The living room doorway gaped like a dark mouth. Shadows shifted, and I swore I saw a movement. A shape, hunched and broad just out of sight. My throat went dry. Mom, she didn't look at me. She kept cutting her chicken into tiny pieces, hands shaking. My dad's jaw clenched, and Anna forced a laugh that cracked halfway out of her throat. "Come on, boy," the voice rumbled again, louder this time. "Join me?" I shoved back my chair. "That's impossible. He's dead." The entire table went silent. My mom dropped her fork. My dad finally looked at me, his eyes cold and wet, and whispered, "Don't say that. Not here." The air grew heavy, thick like smoke. The candles flickered violently, though no wind blew. I felt something brush against my ankle on the table, rough, cold, like dry bark or bone. And then the chair at the end of the table scraped back. Slowly, deliberately, the sound with dragging against the floor made my stomach twist. My family didn't move, didn't speak. Their eyes locked on their plates, refusing to look up. I couldn't breathe. The chair was no longer empty. I couldn't see him clearly, not with my eyes, but I felt him there, the weight of his presence pressed against me, suffocating, as if the air itself bent around him. The glass of wine at his place lifted from the table, tilted, and spilled down an invisible throat. I was shaking. "This isn't real," I whispered. "He's gone. He's gone." The voice cut me off, closer now, right at my ear though I was across the table. "I'm not gone. I'll never be gone. And neither will you." My mom began to sob softly, whispering, "Please, just eat, Daniel. Please." The food on my plate shifted again. This time it didn't return to normal. The chicken skin peeled back, revealing muscle and tendon. The mashed potatoes writhed with something moving underneath, something alive. Blood seeped across the porcelain plate. I pushed the plate away, gagging. "What is this? What's happening to you people?" My dad's face twisted. "We made a promise," he said flatly, "to keep him with us. Always. But it requires more than memories." The shadows in the room pulsed. The voice thundered, shaking the walls. "Feed him." The food on the table began to rot in unison. Steam turned into smoke. The smell of decay filled the room, thick and choking. My family didn't flinch. They picked up their forks, scooped the rancid meat, and raised it to their mouths. I screamed, "Stop, he's dead." Anna turned to me, tears streaming down her face, her lips stained dark. "If you loved us, you'd eat too." I stood, stumbling back, but the air grew colder, heavier, pinning me in place. The shadow in the living room doorway stretched, crawling across the floor, reaching for me with long, skeletal fingers. My grandfather's voice was deafening now. "You will not leave. You are blood, and blood binds us here." The walls groaned, the lights flickered, and I realized what they had done. This wasn't just dinner. This was a ritual. My family had tethered his spirit, refusing to let him rest, and now they wanted me to join them forever. I fought to move, to breathe, to scream, but the shadow wrapped around me, cold and endless, pulling me toward that chair. My family watched with hollow eyes, still chewing, still obeying. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was my grandfather's place at the table, no longer empty. His rotting smile stretched wide, and he whispered, "Welcome home." I didn't understand why my family insisted on having a special dinner. We weren't the kind of people who made a big deal about meals. Thanksgiving, Christmas, sure, but a random Sunday night? That was unusual. My mom had called me 3 times in a single day, her voice strained yet strangely excited. "It's important, Michael. Everyone will be there. We're celebrating something tonight. You have to come." "What are we celebrating?" I asked. There was a pause, then just one word. "Family." I almost didn't go, but something in the way she said it, like it wasn't a request but an order, pushed me into my car. When I walked into the house, The first thing I noticed was a table. It wasn't set like a normal family dinner. Every plate was placed with surgical precision, forks and knives aligned perfectly, napkins folded into sharp triangles. Candles ringed the table, not just at the center, but forming strange, deliberate patterns. Some were arranged in circles, others in pairs. I couldn't shake the feeling that it looked more like an altar than a dining table. The food was already laid out: roasted meats, dark stews, bowls of vegetables glistening with oil. Everything smelled rich, overwhelming, like spices I didn't recognize. My parents greeted me with tense smiles. My sister Rachel hugged me quickly, her arms stiff, her eyes not quite meeting mine. Everyone looked different, nervous, focused. We sat. My mom clasped her hands and whispered something under her breath before lifting her fork. I thought maybe she was praying, but it wasn't any prayer I knew. The words didn't sound like English. My dad and Rachel did the same, muttering the same strange sounds before touching their food. What was that? I asked, trying to laugh. Some new grace I haven't heard of? They ignored me. I stared at the plate in front of me. A slice of meat, pink and glistening, sat on top of dark gravy. Steam curled up, carrying a smell both inviting and repulsive. I picked up my fork slowly, cutting into it. The texture was odd, too soft, almost spongy. When I put it in my mouth, my stomach turned. It didn't taste like chicken, beef, or pork. It tasted wrong, metallic, heavy, like blood. I gagged, dropping my fork. What the hell is this? My dad's eyes snapped to mine, sharp as a blade. Eat, he said. I laughed nervously. No, seriously, what is this? My mom's smile trembled. It's for you, Michael. For all of us. We need you to eat. Rachel's hand shook as she cut another piece, whispering those same strange words before lifting it to her lips. She chewed with tears in her eyes, forcing herself to swallow. The candles flickered violently, though no draft moved through the room. Shadows stretched across the walls, crawling like living things. I pushed my plate back. I'm not eating this. The silence that followed was suffocating. My family didn't look at me, didn't argue. Instead, they all whispered together, voices blending into a low chant. The same strange words, repeated again and again. The flames grew taller, bending inward toward the table. The air grew thick, heavy, vibrating with something I couldn't explain. And then I felt it, a presence. Something sat down beside me, though no chair scraped. The space at my left pressed in, air growing colder. I didn't see it, but I knew it was there, watching, waiting. My stomach twisted violently. What the hell did you bring me here for? My mom finally looked at me, her eyes glistening with desperation. We can't hold it back anymore. It chose you. It always chooses the blood that leaves and comes back. I shook my head. You're insane. I'm leaving. I stood, but my dad slammed his hand on the table, plates rattling. His voice was low, commanding. Sit down. The candles around me flared, trapping me in their glow. The shadows thickened, forming shapes, hands, claws, faces that flickered in and out of existence. I staggered, feeling cold breath against my ear. The chant grew louder, faster, filling every corner of the room. And then the food changed. The meat on my plate writhed, pulsing as though alive. The vegetables blackened, rotting in seconds. The gravy bubbled like tar. I gagged, but my family leaned closer, their faces pale, their eyes wide, whispering urgently, "Eat, eat, eat." I felt something brush against my wrist, thin fingers, impossibly long, curling over my skin. I screamed, jerking back, but my chair held me like it was nailed to the floor. The voice came next, not from my family, but from whatever sat at the table with us. It was deep guttural, layered like 1,000 mouths speaking at once. "He is ours. Feed him." My mom sobbed, covering her face. Rachel trembled, whispering apologies under her breath. My dad stared at me with hollow eyes and said, "We made a promise. We can't break it now." The presence pressed harder against me, forcing my hand toward the plate. My fork lifted on its own, spearing the flesh, raising it toward my mouth. I fought, shaking, but the strength wasn't mine anymore. The shadows roared, the candles bent inward, and the room filled with the sound of chewing, loud, wet, endless chewing. But it wasn't my family eating. It was it. As the meat touched my lips, I understood. This wasn't just dinner. It was a covenant. The food was an animal. It wasn't even human in the way I knew. It was a piece of the thing at the table, and once I ate it, I'd never leave. The last thing I heard before everything went black was my family's voices blending into one. "Welcome, Michael. The family is whole again." Family dinners aren't always what they seem. Sometimes, the real horror starts after plates are cleared. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because the next story is even darker.